Yeah, hi church. I like that new trailer, it's so cool. Well made, I love our media team. Cool, welcome to Celebrate Life Church. All you here and all those watching online. I am so glad that you're here and that we can dive into a very interesting topic and a very cool series. And I'm super excited to kick that series off called Tough Questions with some tough questions we're gonna try to answer. And maybe you know that maybe from your studies or from school or even from work, you're sitting at your desk and you're trying to get through a question. You're trying to understand it and it just does not make any sense in your head. It's just, there's this big knot in your head. It's this massive tangled knot in your brain. And even though I loved math in school, when I hit university and there was these advanced math classes that I was forced to take, that was pretty much my experience. I opened the textbook and there's just weird symbols I've never even seen existing before and a bunch of question marks in my head. And the professor was so fast when he went through it. So yeah, similar situation I think can also happen in our faith life and in our belief, that we can stumble across questions that just don't make any sense and leave a big knot in our brain. And for example, one of these questions is that maybe some 5-year-old has already asked their parents when the parents explained them maybe the creation story, and then the kiddo goes, okay, creator, and who made God? Who made this creator? Because we encounter this already at the very beginning of the Bible. We open the Bible, first page, first verse is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. So then you can ask, okay, in the beginning, and what was before the beginning? What was before that, right? What was there? And yeah, we can sum that up in some questions, or 2 questions I want to sum it up with. It's like the first one, like who made God? That's the first one that we're going to be looking at today. And you might also reword that in, or that might be your question, is like, what if God is man-made? My handwriting is awful. But I hope I'm really trying to make it thick so the people online can also see it. But yeah, who made God and what if God is man-made? 2 questions we're going to be facing today. And if these are your questions, then this is epic because it's totally valid to ask those questions. And in reference to 1 Peter 3:15, it's kind of the motto verse for our series, is that we want to try to discuss some of these tough questions. And here in 1 Peter it says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, and always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So we want to try to give answers to that. And I have to accept that we can't always have the answers. I won't have all the answers you might have even for this topic. And we only have 30 minutes, right? But we can try to give good answers to some of these skeptical questions. And the exploration of these questions is actually called apologetics, which comes from Greek, old Greek word, apologia, I think, defense, justification. And it means it's a defense of a worldview or a defense of a religion, right? And I want to make a second very important statement up front, is that I believe that if God gave us, if a God exists and he gave us these amazing brains, complicated brains, then I think he likes it, he's excited when we ask tough questions, we try to answer those, and we think really hard and we think through it. And I deeply believe that with him, questions and doubts are welcome. That also means you are welcome with your questions and your doubts. And maybe that's why you're here, or you tuned in online, right? You have so many questions, and this whole faith thing does not make so much sense yet. You have just so many questions, and it just doesn't fit together. So I'm really glad that you have the courage to ask those questions and join them today. And maybe some of them might be answered. So, who made God? The honest answer is, I don't know all of it, but I believe it's no one that made God. And I want to offer you 3 convictions today that help me understand that and might help you. And those 3 convictions, I believe we have them on slide here, is the first one is, I believe it's reasonable to believe that the universe was caused. The second conviction is, it's reasonable to accept the existence of an uncaused first cause. And the third one is that I'm convinced that it's worth it to believe in an eternal God who is that first cause. All right, 3 main convictions that we're going to go through. So the first one, it's reasonable to believe that the universe was caused. And we read that earlier on, the first verse in the Bible is that the Bible brings up quite the claim, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you can believe that or you cannot believe it. But the Bible, the biblical claims, they go even further. So I'm going to bring out a couple of these claims or verses. For example, do you know, have you not heard, the Lord is everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. Isaiah 40. So God is eternal. He's the creator. He's the genius designer. Unfathomable understanding. Genius. And then the next verse, like, before the mountains were brought forth, or even you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. Psalm 90. From eternity to eternity, from everlasting to everlasting. That's kind of eternity squared. We know that doesn't work since school. Uncountable numbers of days. And in Colossians 1, Paul goes even a step further. He says, for in him, in God, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible, invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So he says the earth is made by God, and he keeps it running. He keeps the show running. Every natural constant, the gravity constant, is like held by God in its place. The cosmos is held together by God. That's the claim of the Bible. And it's quite the claim, I believe. And maybe, I don't know, does it fit with your worldview? Is it compatible? And when I look at nature, sometimes I'm blown away because it's so complicated and so complex, and I can observe so much geniusness in the nature, right? It's incredible. And I brought you a picture of this curly-haired dude, and you might remember his name, Isaac Newton, maybe from science class, and he said an interesting thing. He said, in the absence of any proof, the thumb alone would convince me of God's existence. So he said solely the human thumb is enough for him to convince him of the proof of God. And many atheists, they would respond to that, okay, wait, but if there's a designer, who designed the designer? Who made the designer? And maybe as an atheist, you even say, okay, I don't need God at all. Why God? Because the universe is eternal. It was always there. There doesn't need to be a creator. That might be the criticism of an atheist. They say it does not make sense to believe or to speak of a created world because the universe is eternal. And the philosopher Bertrand Russell, he states that in his essay, Why I'm Not a Christian, the following way. He says, I think it's on the screen as well, if everything must have a cause, then God must have a cause. If there can be anything without a cause, it might just as well be the world instead of God, right? So there's 2 major statements in that. First, he says, if everything is caused, also God has to be caused. So who made God, pretty much? And secondly, he says, if there is something that is eternal, everlasting, could also be the world and not God. I want to leave you with 3 comments on that. First one is, the universe is definitely finite. And we know this since the second law of thermodynamics. The law simplifies states that the universe is running out of usable energy. The so-called entropy, you might have heard that word beforehand, is constantly increasing. Easier said, the disorder, the chaos is increasing. The usable energy is decreasing. And that's a fact. The sun will burn out. Light switch off. So consequently, this also means that there never has been an unlimited amount of energy. And this we know that the universe cannot be eternal and uncaused. Okay, that was the first comment. The second comment is, the universe constantly expands. It sounds absolutely crazy, but as far as I can understand science, this is proven. And this is also an argument that is used for explaining the Big Bang theory, saying, okay, there was once something started, and since then we're expanding. The universe is expanding. It's crazy, but no matter what the universe caused, be it God or something else, the constant expansion of it points towards there being a cause for it. So it's reasonable to believe that there is a cause for the universe. Thirdly, third comment. Often it's said everything has to have a cause, right? Everything has to have a cause. But technically, you have to say everything that has a beginning has to have a cause or a maker. If we look at God, God by definition doesn't have a beginning. He always existed. He's eternal, from eternity to eternity. And Norman Geisler, an author, I believe, he made an interesting observation. He said, if the universe is eternal, there's no point in asking who made it. The same way, if God is eternal, there's no way to ask who made God. It doesn't make sense. It's like asking who made the unmade. And it's actually what they call a category mistake. It means you put something in a category or a box that it just doesn't belong in. Another guy I read about, J. Warner Wallace, a professor, he used a fitting comparison that I liked. He said, what sound does silence make? This does not make sense to ask that question because silence is by definition soundless. It's the lack of sound, right? So to sum up, my first conviction is that it's reasonable to believe that the universe was caused. So first conviction. And my second point, or my second conviction, I want to propose to you how reasonable it is to accept the existence of an uncaused first cause. And if we ask this question, who made God? Then I believe there are some underlying assumptions that we kind of assume when we ask these questions, or this question. For example, that our reality is bound to the limitations of time and space, and also of our understanding of time and space. And we know that since Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, we know that this doesn't quite hold. And I want to give you a fairly simple example for that. So now we're gonna switch into a little bit of physics class here. So here we have a beautiful little NASA rocket. And this little astronaut, he's 20 years old. And currently we have the year 2000, just as an example. This is the fanciest, newest NASA space rocket. And this dude is going for a travel around our galaxy where he comes back when he's 53 years old. And I said it's like a really fancy new spaceship. So let's say 20 years, huh? So the spaceship is able to travel at a speed of 60-61 of the speed of light. So fairly fast. And now my question for you guys is, now the people that can calculate quickly in their head, what year is it when he comes back? What year on Earth is it when he comes back? Any guesses? No guesses? Nobody's brave to say a number?
2033.
That's an interesting, yeah. So year 2183. He's 53 years old, comes back in that year. It's the fourth generation of NASA engineers observing his flight, and all his family is gone. The fact is that on the rocket, the time moves slower. Time can be altered, slowed down, sped up when objects travel at really high speeds. That's the observation that Albert Einstein made, or one of them. This is called time dilatation, if you want to look it up and do the calculation yourself. I mean, this condition of flying at super high speed is somewhat unrealistic, but nevertheless, I think it brings us to a very interesting conclusion. The statement that there's nothing outside of time and space doesn't hold for me quite that well anymore. Our understanding of time is so limited. It's so limited. Even more so, we have trouble understanding that, but even more so, understanding the concept of eternity completely blows our mind. So let's return back to the God of the Bible after we have made this interesting observation. So unarguably, time is part of our universe. We feel it every day. Time's running out, I'm too late for the bus, whatever. So whatever has created this universe, was it God or not, cannot be bound to time. Therefore, whatever has created the universe has to be eternal. And the Bible states God has made this world and the universe. Consequently, he also made time. He created time. And if God made time, he's not limited to our understanding of time. That means he didn't start to exist. We cannot apply that to that. And if you never had a beginning, you don't need to have a cause. Therefore, that's my second conviction, right? It's very reasonable to accept the existence of an uncaused first cause. And I want to elaborate it a little more. And we want to look at one theologian, a philosopher from the 1300s. His name is Thomas Aquinas, I believe. And in one of his major writings, he is conducting a proof of God, where he is already writing about this first cause, this uncaused first cause. So he's saying okay, we have the law of cause and effect, so that every effect has to have a cause. For example, the effect is my bottle is tipped over, the cause was I ran against it, right? That's a simple example for that. So effects are by definition caused by something. And he argues that at the end of all things and at the end of all causes, there needs to be something else that is not caused. Something that exists in itself, an absolute reality. And that's why he writes, we have it on the screen, it is necessary to assume a first cause, who all call God. That's 800 years ago. So Aquinas says that the first cause has to be God. So he says there's nothing irrational about the concept of a self-existing, eternal being that carries all the power in itself. And he says such a concept is not only logical possible, it's also logical necessary to have this first cause. And this all might sound super theoretical to you, but I want to explain it to you with a kindergarten example, okay? And you might have even encountered that yourself. Because kids, they love big things. They love superheroes and big cars and fantasy beings and creatures such as sharks. We actually just saw a kid playing in the Schlossplatz with a shark and the little fountains, and he was so happy. Little toy shark. So we have two little kids like Paul and Ferdinand. Let's call them Paul and Ferdinand. And Paul loves to draw little sharks. So he draws his little shark and is like, Ferdinand, look at my shark. It's so strong and the teeth are so sharp. And then Ferdinand goes, my shark is so much bigger. I have so many teeth. My shark is 100 times bigger. He's going to eat yours so easily. And then Paul's like, no, my shark is so much bigger than yours. He has the sharpest teeth ever. And Ferdinand's like, mine is 100,000 million times bigger than yours. And it's the biggest teeth ever. And then Paul goes, mine is 1,000,000 times. And Ferdinand is 10,100,000 times. And mine is infinite bigger than yours and stronger. And so you hear them go on their way home, for the next 20 minutes. And this illustration is called this illustrates the so-called infinite regress, which is by definition, it's on the screen as well, a sequence of reasoning or justification which can never come to an end. It goes on forever. You hear them forever arguing, mine is infinite bigger, I said it first. And this example is not about effect and cause, but it shows that the battle between our little Ferdinand and little Paul is eternal. They could do that forever. And we easily fall into the same trap when we ask the question, who made God? Because if the God of the Bible was created by another God, then that other God might have been created by a bigger God, let's say a bigger fish, and this God might be created by another bigger God, and so on, and we land in the infinite regress. And an argument that leads into an infinite regress is considered contradicted, refuted. It doesn't make sense. And therefore, I sum all of that up in my second conviction, that it's very reasonable to accept the existence of an uncaused origin of the universe, an uncaused first cause. So my third conviction now is, I believe, the most important one. So if you take anything away from this, then it'd be the third point. That I believe it's so worth it to believe in this eternal God as the first cause. So far, we've determined that this original origin of the universe, this first cause, has to have certain characteristic, whether it is God or something else. So it has to be non-spatial, not tied to time, immaterial, eternal, so not created. And it has to have enough power to create everything out of nothing. And I'm so deeply convinced that there's another very important characteristic to it, which is it's a personal, loving, living being. And that's why I sum it up in my third conviction. It's so worth it to believe in an eternal, personal God, a personal God of life. And for that, I want to look with you at John 1, the first verses in the chapter 1, where it says about Jesus, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. It's talking about Jesus. And the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And now very important, in him was life, and life was the light of mankind. And to those verses, I want to state two important things. So the first one is, in the beginning, before there was anything else, there was God. And in him was life. In God was life. A living person. So since always, there has existed a personal, living being. So no matter how far you go back on the eternity scale, forever and ever and ever further back, there's one unchanging reality, which is life, divine life, personal life. That's why the verse 4 says, in him was life. And that leads to a second comment on those verses. Because atheists, they believe that at the beginning there was only a random matter and energy. And then out of this eventually formed life. So for billions of years with no creator, no intelligence, no design, no purpose, no goal, no plan, emerges somehow this genius, complex, interdependent biological structure, and also this glorious thing that we call personhood, you and me. And this collides so clearly with the Christian worldview that says, in him was life. Before there was matter, there was life, eternal life, divine life, and then life gave rise to matter. It's the opposite way. And this life is created for relationship. It's created in uniqueness. It's created with meaning. It's created to reflect the image of God. It's created with worth and beauty. And John Piper writes it fittingly, I believe, in this quote, when you look upon a human being, you're seeing something staggeringly extraordinary in the image of life. An echo, a reflection of infinite, ultimate reality. So I read it again. When you look upon a human being, you're seeing something staggeringly extraordinary in the image of life. An echo, a reflection of infinite, ultimate reality. And if we go back to the questions we asked at the beginning, 2 questions. Who made God? And what if God is just man-made? I want to rewind these questions, and I believe there's 2 much more important questions that we need to ask here, which is the first one being, who made you? And the second one being, what if you are God made? What if you are created by God? Who made you in all your beauty and your uniqueness with your unique fingerprint? It's the eternal God that created you for eternity with Him. And not only that, I am convinced that sometimes we can feel that there's a sense for eternity in us. And the Bible says that in Ecclesiastes. He has made everything beautiful in its time, so God. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And I think you might know this, you might remember this even in your life, that sometimes there's this feeling of longing for eternity. You look at a sunset and you just don't want it to end. It should stay forever like that. Or in a concert or an event like a Champions League final, whatever, and just don't want it to end. It's so epic. But even more so, we long for the eternal, like that beauty lasts, that wholesomeness lasts. We long for healing that lasts. And then there's the biblical reality that says in Jeremiah, the Lord appeared to us in the past saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love from eternity, and I have drawn you with unfailing kindness. And that's my conviction, that I have been loved since eternity. And I believe in this reality. That's my personal hope. And that's the reason for this, my deep third conviction that I shared with you. That it's worth it to believe in this eternal God. And it's so worth it to get to know this personal, living, loving God. And He speaks this encouragement in our souls so that our souls can say with the Psalm 139 writer, for you, God, created my inmost being, and you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. What if you're wonderfully made? What if eternity is real and there's really this eternal God of love? That's a game changer that fills a life with purpose, worth, and value. And in Jesus, I believe God reveals Himself and makes Himself available. And He gives us His Spirit as a comforter, as a helper, and also as a seal for eternity, like we celebrated last week. In Jesus, our questions they get a personalized answer. They find a personalized answer. God reveals Himself as the living, triune, personal God, the loving God, a God of reconciliation, who accepts me and you exactly the way we are. The God of life who reveals Himself as I've been always life. He invites us, the God of life invites us into a life with Him. Living life with Him. He gives us an eternal perspective and a perspective onto a reality where there's no more mourning, no more sickness, no more pain, no more sadness. And He gives us a promise of that eternity. And only the eternal God can do that. Here in 1 John, we read this, I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life. The God of life invites you to see the beauty in the other person, sitting across from you in the U-Bahn or somewhere, sitting next to you here. This person next to you is an echo of the eternal, a reflection of the infinite. What a beautiful way to walk through life. Giving people worth and value and hope because they have an eternal perspective and they image an eternal, loving God. So that's my goal for you today. That you just see that learning that knowing and loving this God, this eternal God, is the best thing ever. So I hope that after this message, you can agree with me first that it makes sense to believe in the origin of the universe, and that it also makes sense to accept that there is an first cause for the universe, but most of all, that you see that it's so worthwhile to know, love, and follow this loving eternal God, because He gives your life purpose. And at the end of time, His hands are open for you. Amen.